Hello, I'm Mike Arndt. This is my presentation. It's called The Gymnasium of the Engine, How Computers and Chess Develop Symbiotically. And it is about that. It's about how computers and chess have both advanced over the past 70 or so years in conjunction with one another. So we're going to start with how chess is today. So in modern chess, computers dominate the scene. You have your engines, which are basic programs that will tell you what the best moves are in positions. You have your databases, and you've got all sorts of other things such as puzzles that you can find online and simply researching moves and positions using computers. So today, every grandmaster uses their computer for preparation when they're playing a game or a match. They will look at what openings they want. They'll look at the games that their opponents have played using databases, and they will use opening books and stuff like that. Computers are such an important part of modern chess play that even very strong players will be caught cheating, often using their phones to look at positions or to determine what the best moves are. And this is because computers in the past 70 years have gotten substantially more powerful as well as smaller. So it's easier for a powerful chess computer to fit in someone's pocket compared to 30 years ago when most of the best chess computers could be beat by humans. However, they also took up very large sizes. So before World War II, chess was seen primarily as a game that was played between humans. While there were ideas of computers that could play and match the strength of humans, it wasn't a reality, and computers were just not in the scene. So an important thing to remember when talking about the development of chess and computers in conjunction with one another is that chess has often been quoted as being the Drosophila of artificial intelligence, which it's a type of fruit fly. The Drosophila is, and it's the one that many geneticists use when experimenting with genetic modification, and it's the same way with chess and computers. That's what this quote is saying. Essentially, chess has become a way that computer scientists would experiment with their programs, and the power of their computers is by seeing how well it could play chess. So you might be wondering about the title of my presentation, and it is a play on a famous quote by Blaise Pascal, who said that chess is the gymnasium of the mind. And this was essentially calling back to what I mentioned earlier, which was that chess was a game for humans. And after World War II, it stopped becoming a game for just humans and started to become the gymnasium of the engine, or the chess engine, instead of just the human mind. So let's talk about the history of chess really quick. Chess was invented in modern day India. It has its origins there, and it was essentially a war game designed for generals or kings. And it was played on an 8x8 grid, and it had several different pieces which all did different things and were meant to imitate the various soldiers that would be on a battlefield. So after it was created in India, chess spread to Persia, and so Persia was where the game went from being played only by generals and kings to being played by all manners of nobility, and it became an important tool for people in the area. This is also where many modern chess terms come from, such as a rook or checkmate, which comes from the Persian word meaning the king is dead. After Persia was conquered by the Umayyad Caliphate, it spread to the Middle East and throughout the Muslim world, where many of the pieces changed shapes and became more abstract rather than looking like people. After this, the game was spread to Spain, which was under the control of the Caliphate at the time, and it pretty much spread to the rest of Europe from Spain. There were slight rule changes until we started to settle on our modern rule set around the 1500s. There were different variations throughout Europe, but the one that we have today came out of Spain. So after this, chess went through many phases, including the Romantic phase and the hypermodern phase, which were essentially just different styles of play, which prioritized different things depending on what era they were in. So around the 1800s, people began to come up with ideas of machines that could play chess and could rival human intellect. So the most famous example is called the Turk, and it is essentially a machine which is designed to look like a computer playing chess. The Turk is said to have defeated very strong chess players and also to have played people such as Benjamin Franklin and Napoleon, amongst others. The problem for many with the Turk is that it was not a computer, but it in fact housed a strong chess player within, which could see the bottom of the board and could make moves using the prosthetic arms of the Turk. While this wasn't common knowledge at the time, many famous people such as Edgar Allan Poe hypothesized it, and some even produced little evidence about it. So after World War II, ideas that were cemented in the eyes of the public through machines such as the Turk began to become a reality. So the first recorded chess program for a computer was coded by Alan Turing and was called TurboChamp. And it was essentially a very basic chess program that would print out what moves it wanted to make and could think ahead no more than 3 moves. And it was not very strong, but it was the first of its kind, which is very important. TurboChamp is so important when it comes to early chess engines because it really set the groundwork for what would come in the future. And Turing tried to model his program based off of the human mind and tried to make it work in similar ways. Ultimately, this showed what Turing believed the potential for computers was, in that they could imitate people and be mistaken as people. The power of these early engines really came into play towards the end of the 1960s when the first computer was entered into a tournament. This was an amateur tournament held in Boston, and in the tournament, there were players of various skill levels, but none of them would have been considered experts at the game. The computer played 5 games and ended up losing 4 of them and then drawing 1. And it was later given a rating of around 1200. This means that it was below that of an average player, as the average at the time was a little more than 1300, close to 1400. Over the following decades, computers would fall into several different categories depending on how they played the game. The earliest of these chess programs were called min-max programs, and they were designed to take into account databases as well as using the machine's intellect to determine which positions were worth remembering and which were not. This then later led to intuition programs, which were essentially programs which the computer would evaluate the position and determine what the best outcomes were, rather than storing terabytes of information of positions. There were also the theoretical tree programs, which some were slightly implemented, and these were essentially programs which had massive databases and tried to store as many possible positions in their databases as possible. This was not really practical, nor is it today, because the number of chess games that are possible are almost countless, and so it would be incredibly inefficient to try and store all that information in a single database. It was around this point when the game of chess itself began to become influenced by computers. The most famous example of this is the former world champion Garry Kasparov, who claimed to have used databases as early as the 80s to prepare for his games against great players. Before this time, the best way for grandmasters to prepare their games was to look through published books and newspapers to try and find games that their opponents had played and to use the knowledge in these games to prepare for their game against the opponent. But around this time, databases became far more common, where you could find thousands of previously played games in one place, so it made the preparation phase for grandmasters such as Garry Kasparov vastly easier. It was also around this time when computer engines began to become strong enough for players to use them in their games for the preparation. Strong players would be able to put in positions, and while it wasn't as strong as a human player, the computer would be able to tell them what some very good moves were. It was around the beginning of the 90s when computers began to defeat very strong players such as grandmasters and began to win tournament games as well. This all culminated with the rematch between Garry Kasparov and Deep Blue in 1997. While this wasn't the first game between the two, IBM, the company that developed Deep Blue, had substantially upgraded Deep Blue over the past year between this match and the previous match. There were 6 games played in this match, and Deep Blue ended up defeating the world champion Garry Kasparov, which was the first time ever that a computer had defeated the world champion at long chess. Today, the best players in the world don't even stand a chance against many of the greatest computers. Some computers have been defeated by people, but it's very rare and only happens once every few years. So the advancement of computers has shifted the field of chess between the phrase "play like a magician" to "play like a computer." Before the rise of computers, people played much riskier and often played for short-term benefits rather than long-term benefits, especially if the moves looked flashy or impressive. Computers don't really think like this, though, and they think in the long term, which is why the saying "play like a computer" has become more important. This has drastically shifted the play style of chess away from sacrifices and other risky moves towards a more long-term game. So now we've reached the end game for this presentation. So if you guys have any questions, make sure to ask, and I'll be here to answer them. Thanks for watching.